Two North American teams had a disappointing debut to the 2025 VCT Americas League, and those two teams are 100 Thieves and Cloud9. 100 Thieves, a team that only made one change during the offseason, hoping that their mostly kept together roster can run it back and have a good year, and C9, a team that went through quite a bit of offseason changes at different times, and was hoping to get off to a good start, and both these teams ended up winning their first match, but then lost the two consecutive ones. So we're going to look at both teams and their performance at this kickoff tournament and talk about, is the future bright for either of them? This is the board we have today. We're going to be looking at both teams' matches, looking at how they went, and then we're going to be talking about some players and some attack and defense stats. We will be starting with 100 Thieves. The reason why I wanted to talk about both teams in this video as opposed to making one for each of them is because these two teams went through very similar brackets. And yet the way that both of these teams are being talked about is pretty different, even though I think there are some promising signs and some concerning signs for both teams. But starting on the 100 Thieves side, they started their bracket against MIBR, a team that also went through a lot of change in the offseason, having a mostly completely new roster, and going up against 100 Thieves as their first match ended up being a really bad matchup for them. 100 Thieves is a team that can play with a lot of confidence and embrace the villain role. That is a trademark of Boostio-led teams, dating back to him on Evil Geniuses. Boostio-led teams are known for their amount of trash talking, playing with a lot of confidence. That's when they thrive. And MIBR being a team that really needed to gain some confidence coming into this league with a lot of inexperienced players. Definitely ended up being a bad matchup for them, and 100 Thieves did a very good job at shutting them down, especially Ospos. 100 Thieves would win it 2-0, dominating on Lotus 13-4. Bind did end up being a bit of a different story though. They did win this one 13-9. However, MIBR had a really good first half, but 100 Thieves had a very solid attack side of their own to close this one out and only allow MIBR to get one win on their defense. So after this match, it looks like 100 Thieves looked like a pretty good team. They dominated on Lotus, they did really well on Bind, a map that they used to be very good on. But I say used to be because of how that map went for 100 Thieves for the rest of the kickoff. Because then we moved to the match against Sentinels. This one they did lose 1-2. They came into it with a lot of confidence, they looked really good right off the bat, getting the momentum early, winning Split 13-4. Sentinels used to be the gods at Split. They had an incredible win record on that map in 2024, so 100 Thieves spoiling that supposedly favored victory for Sentinels, that was really important for them. Asuna was playing very well, Boostio was out calling John, and putting Cryocells on the Sage seemed to be the right wrench to throw into Sentinels' game plan. So it seemed like 100 Thieves absolutely have the favor. They had the momentum for the most part during the MIBR match, aside from the first half of the second map, but this Bind map was where that momentum shift started to happen in favor of Sentinels. This one ended up being a 13-9 scoreline in favor of Sentinels. 100 Thieves would win the first pistol, but then Sentinels got the momentum back and they ran with it for the rest of the map. 100 Thieves would only win 4 rounds on their attack side. Sentinels did a really good job at shutting them down. 100 Thieves showing very similar play on Bind to what they had in 2024. So I do understand that if they had a comp that worked in 2024, you can try to make it work again, but a big part of Valorant and the VCT especially is adaptation. You have to be able to adapt, you have to be able to come up with new creative ways to win maps. So running the same comp that you did last year, it can work at times, but for them, it's starting to stagnate. And it was interesting because I remember Zeke's doing an interview at the end of the first map, and he said that he felt his team was ahead of the meta when it comes to Taeho. And when they did play him on Split to some really good effect, they didn't play Taeho on either Bind or Pearl. It is still really early in the Taeho meta, so we don't know every single map that he's going to be effective on, but a lot of teams are playing him pretty much everywhere, and Sentinels were able to play that character a lot better than 100 Thieves did, especially on Pearl, which was the same exact scoreline in favor of Sentinels. But hey, they lost against Sentinels, it was a close match, it's a team that they usually lose against. Now they can go down to the lower bracket and face a team like Energy coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss to C9. Unfortunately, this one did not go in their favor either. Lotus was a very close affair, both teams trading rounds going back and forth. 100 Thieves were the first team to get to map point, it was 12-9 for them in round 21, but they did end up blowing that lead and Energy tied it, showing that Energy are a pretty good comeback team right now. Fortunately for 100 Thieves, they got the only 2 rounds of overtime that won, 14-12 was the final score. But then we move on to Pearl, a map that they seem to not not be great on right now. I was watching Plat Chat the other day. One theory they had when it comes to Pearl is that maybe Cryo is doing really well in scrims on this map, but in official VCT matches he has not found the success so far, and they end up losing Pearl in the exact same scoreline as they did against Sentinels. And then they go on to Bind, but they had the same exact comp that they had in the previous 2 matches, so I don't think that this was the right decision to let this map get there. It wasn't their map pick, it was Lotus, so I guess they decided, well, we'll just pick a map that we're comfortable on in Lotus, and then if Bind is the decider, then fine, we're pretty good on that map, but they just aren't right now. Off the back of Mada, Energy were able to shut down 100 Thieves to a pretty effective rate. 13-9 is still a pretty close scoreline, but that is the number that 100 Thieves have lost at in all 4 maps that they've lost, losing on both Bind and Pearl 13-9 in both their Sentinels match and their Energy match. So there is reason to be optimistic about 100 Thieves, and Planchet especially being pretty high on this team despite their losses, but for me, I just can't really get behind that. I definitely think some 100 Thieves fans are obviously overreacting to the losses, but every fan base does that, but I don't think that you can sit here, look at these results, and think that 100 Thieves are a top 4 team. Yes, they were 2 very close matches that they lost. They easily could have won either one. However, you need to be able to close out those matches. This is looking very similar to 100 Thieves last year. They did not adapt to their bind. Their bind is looking rough right now, so now teams have an easy counterpick against them. At the very least, they look good on Lotus, winning both of those matches, and on Split, they did very well. But they need to develop their map pool a little bit more, because if they're still going to be reliant on bind, I don't think that's a very good decision. So yes, these are close matches against some teams that are supposed to be really good this year, and they did well against MIBR, but overall, I'm just not convinced about 100 Thieves at this point. If you want to be a top team, you have to be able to close out those games and beat those other top teams. Moving on, we're going to be looking at C9's matches. They started their bracket facing off against the team that would eventually beat 100 Thieves, Energy. Energy were the heavy favorites heading into this one, but C9 ended up taking this one 2-0. Starting their match off very well on Fracture, having a 10-2 first half, so they absolutely had the lead, but then they almost blew it, because Energy would end up tying the game by having their own half where they won 10 rounds. But fortunately for C9, Energy seem kind of bad at overtime right now, so 14-12 ends up being the final score. They narrowly miss a very big choke. And then they go to Lotus, which ends up being a very close map as well. This one does not go into overtime. 13-10 is the final score, C9 having a very solid attack half at the end of it. So they get this huge upset win, and now they're going against G2, a team that we have high expectations for, but we don't know how their new player Jogamo is going to fit in. But he fit in pretty quick, and C9 just did not get a lot going during this match. Ends up being 2-0 in favor of G2. Lotus not being as successful for C9 as it did against Energy. 13-6, C9 not being able to get much done on either half. And then we go to Abyss, which gets a little better for C9, but not by much. 13-8 would be the final score there. They had a decent attack half during that game, but it just was not enough. But hey, G2 is a very good team. So then they move on to the lower bracket, and now they have to face off against MIBR, a team that played against 100 Thieves and looked pretty pedestrian. And one thing that we saw with C9 against Energy is that Zeppa had a very, very good game. However, against G2, not that effective. Against MIBR, not that effective either. This one ends up being close, but C9 just cannot close this one out. They do win a map. That one was Lotus, 13-7. A great first half on the attack side gave them the edge that they needed. But then they move on to Abyss, where I guess MIBR did their homework by watching that game against G2. 13-10 was that final score, but C9 almost doing what Energy did to them, which is MIBR had a 10-2 half, and then C9 started to mount a comeback. However, they would not tie it. The closest they got was a 10-9 scoreline, but MIBR got the rounds that they needed to close it out. And then after that map, it seemed like the wins were taken out of C9's sails. Pearl ended up being a 13-7 win in favor of MIBR, while their new additions in Xenom and Cortesia definitely had better matches than they did against 100 Thieves. C9 definitely had the opportunity there. Both players at certain points during the map were struggling, but players like Oxy, Zeppa could not get much going to take the lead back. So that match ended C9's kickoff run. But hey, you lost against the best player in the world in Ospas, at least some people's best player in the world, and you ended up having a pretty good victory against Energy. That's great, right? My problem with C9 is this is such a weird team. This is a team of patterns. Over the past 3 years of the VCT Franchise League, C9's years have gone eerily similar. They have won their first match played of the year 3 years in a row now. In 2023, it was at lock-in against Paper X. They would go on to lose to DRX. In 2024, they would beat MIBR in their first match of kickoff, but then they would eventually lose to MIBR later in the bracket. And now they've done the exact same thing again, but this time Energy being the team that they beat. So how I'm expecting this to go is that their kickoff, after having a very solid first win, they fell off a cliff. And then in stage 1, they're gonna randomly be one of the best teams in the entire VCT Americas, because that's how it works for them. They have a bad start to the year after winning the first match, they have a really good stage 1, and then playoffs happens and they fall off a cliff and completely choke everything. And then the team doesn't look the same, there's probably roster change in there somewhere, and then they don't make it to any internationals, which is just a shame considering the talent that they have on their roster. Not that I think that they have a super talented team that can qualify for internationals, but they have one of the best young talents in Valorant right now, and that is Oxy. But we're gonna look at 100 Thieves players for a second. So for both of these teams, I wanted to highlight 2 players on each roster. For 100 Thieves, I decided to put Cryocells and Busio. Both players getting a lot of discussion online, a lot of criticism, some of it deserved, some of it not. Starting with Cryocells, I think he was their team's best performer. Asuna had more of a flashy experience in the kickoff. He was very solid for them, getting a lot of incredible kills, but Cryocells was more consistent. At least when it comes to the stat line, he had 138 kills, 115 deaths, 41 assists for a KD ratio of 1.20, leading his team in kills and KD ratio. And he's doing this while playing a variety of characters. He plays a little bit of Duelist with Jet, he played Clove, he played Brimstone, he even played Sage. Cryo is still really good. I don't think that he should be subject to a bunch of criticism from the 100 Thieves fan base. However, when it comes to Busio, I understand it. I know Busio has won a Champions. I know 100 Thieves got a lot better when he joined the roster. However, I do question how much time he has left on this 100 Thieves team. I don't think they're going to make a roster change during the season, but if we keep getting performances like this and the team keeps not winning, then I definitely question it. He's a really good caller, but when it comes to his individual stats, it's pretty bad, at least at kickoff it was. 81 kills, 119 deaths, 56 assists for a KD ratio of 0.68. I know it was just 3 matches, but a 0.68 KD ratio is just pitiful. At the pro level, those are just unacceptable numbers. You see IGLs not being the one fragging out for their team, but still having a KD ratio around like 0.89, maybe 0.95, that kind of range. Like, you're not dying so much more than you're getting kills. But with Busio, at least at kickoff, it was pretty bad. Even in that match against Energy on that overtime game of Lotus, he only had 4 kills. It was a really long game and he could only find 4 kills. That's just not good enough. Also looking at some attack and defense round stats for this team, when it comes to 100 Thieves, on attack they won 51 rounds, they lost 33. That is a win percentage of 60%. So they did quite well on attack. Can't take too much away from them on that side of the map. However, on the other side, not too great. On defense, they won 38, they lost 48. That is a 44% win rate. Not the most abysmal number ever, and again, it's a small sample size, so some numbers are going to be a bit inflated, but still, that is something that they're going to want to work on. So when it comes to 100 Thieves, I do think there is something good here. Again, these were 2 close losses that they had. They could have won either one. However, personally, I don't think that I can put much hope in losing these close matches, because what that tells me is that they can't close out maps. Their bind is looking really concerning, their IGL isn't outcalling other IGLs, and they don't seem to be caught up to speed on the new Tejo meta. They have plenty of time to rest and prepare for the new meta, and we'll see with the map rotation now being a frequent thing, we'll see if they can adapt well to that. But overall, there just isn't enough here for this 100 Thieves roster for me to think that they're going to be a really dominant team. I do think they're going to be good, but if you think that they're going to be good, why isn't C9 going to be great? A lot of people rating C9 a lot lower, even though these are incredibly similar matches. The only real differences with these two teams' runs is that they lost to the team that the other team beat, and then C9 played G2 and 100 Thieves played Sentinels, but those two teams in G2 and Sen are at least thought of to be top 2, top 3 in the region. So both of these teams can't seem to go up against the big dogs of the region. And this is why I wanted to make the video about both of them, because it's eerily similar to each other, but the way they're being talked about in both the fan base and through analysts and casters is quite different. Looking at two players from C9 though, we have Oxy and Zeppa. Wanted to highlight Oxy because he wasn't their best performer at Kickoff. That would definitely go to Vic. Vic is not on the board, but he was one of the more consistently clutch players. I want to talk about Oxy because his performance was not bad. 118 kills, 120 deaths, 30 assists for key ratio of 0.92. Not bad numbers, however, not Oxy-like numbers. We saw this guy last year go toe-to-toe in stats with some of the best players in the region. Him and Ospos were consistently the top 2 in each category during that VCT Americas Stage 1 back in 2024. So we've seen him be a top performer in the region, but at Kickoff, he just didn't seem to get enough going. One thing that I have been preaching about C9 and the roster construction is they have to think about how to build a roster around Oxy. The way that C9 manages their roster is incredibly frustrating to me because they make so many roster changes at such inopportune times, when what they should be doing is building a roster to make this guy very happy and in a place to succeed. I do think that they have players that can do that, but I don't know if they have the best options available, especially when it comes to Zeppa. Now, Zeppa is an interesting player. A lot of people don't like him anymore. He's been on the C9 roster for a very long time, one of the most tenured players on a tier 1 team in VCT. And in most cases, I think that that's really good. I think it's good to have players that have been around the game for a long time, showing that they're willing to invest a lot of their life into it. However, when it comes to Zeppa, I don't think he's proven enough to show that he is worth investing this much time into. I was kind of shocked he wasn't one of the roster changes in the offseason. They got rid of some pretty good players, and Zeppa's still here. This org hasn't really gone anywhere with him on the team. Is that entirely on him? Absolutely not. Maybe C9 thinks that when it comes to like flash initiators that there aren't a ton of better options, but I just can't buy that. At Kickoff, he had 107 kills, 115 deaths, 41 assists, and a key ratio of 0.93, so he was actually a little bit better than Oxy. However, I think these stats are heavily inflated by that match against Energy, where he was just a demon. Zeppa at times can look like one of the best players in the server, but he has proven to be pretty inconsistent at the tier 1 level. I don't know if he's done enough to justify his spot on the roster, and he wasn't able to pull this team to victory in those later 2 matches. I didn't expect them to win against G2, but they could have won against MIBR. Again, I don't want to blame all of C9's problems on one player because we know that the problems go a lot deeper than that, but when there's so much tier 2 talent, you have to think that there's better options out there. Maybe Nismo, he's been looking for a tier 1 spot. I know he's on Cuba right now, but he plays Initiator, and he's an IGL. Maybe that could have been the option instead of Mitch or Rossi, and hey, maybe you could have had Rossi, who could have put up this performance like Zeppa did in that game against Energy, while proving to be more consistent of a player. But they're definitely not the same player, Rossi and Zeppa, but I'm just trying to make a point that there could have been better options out there. I'm not sure if C9 has put themselves in the greatest position here. Looking at their attack and defense, on attack, they won 42 rounds, they've lost 37, which is a win rate of 53%. So not bad on that attack side, not overly dominant, but pretty decent. But when it comes to defense, they have a win percentage of 40% with 29 wins and 44 losses. So they're doing okay on attack, and then they're doing not too great on defense. So just like 100 Thieves, these numbers are a bit inflated because it is a small sample size, but they definitely need to get that defense side locked up because there are some very incredibly talented offensive players in this VCT Americas region. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to look at these two teams and their disappointing starts to the season. There are a lot of different angles that you could take with either of these teams, but I thought it'd be fun to just put them both in one video and talk about them and talk about the parallels between the two. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think of either of these teams' chances going forward? Do you think either of them turn around? Do you think the year is going to go differently for C9 than it has in previous? Are 100 Thieves going to bounce back from this one and look even better? Is this just a little bump in the road? Let me know in the comment section down below. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next one. Bye.